Today, I write once again in the Jesus Diary, my diary. Today was not marked by thunder or flame. No earthquake split the earth beneath my feet. No lightning traced the sky. And yet, I trembled, not outwardly, not with fear, but deep within. There are days when heaven whispers louder than the crowds. Days when a single sentence can strike harder than a sword. And today was one of those days. It came without warning. Spoken at a table still warm with fellowship, surrounded by familiar faces and loyal hands, bread still in fingers, wine still on lips. But something shifted. A voice rose, not in anger, but in devotion. "I will never leave you," he said. And though my eyes never left his, I saw beyond the words. I saw the shadow behind them, the truth that love can be loud, but still unprepared for pain. And in that moment, something shook me. Not because I doubted him, but because I knew what the night would ask of him. And I loved him still. That is the kind of love this day demanded of me. The kind that listens to promises destined to break and holds them anyway. The sky had not yet turned dark, but in my heart, the sun had already begun to set. And still, I stayed. I sat. I listened. Because this too was part of the cross. If this moment touched something deep in you, if you've ever made promises you couldn't keep but meant with your whole heart, touch this diary with a like. Not for me, but to say I'm listening too. The air was still. Not the kind of stillness that calms, but the kind that waits. A stillness that feels like a held breath stretched thin across the heavens. The evening had begun to descend, but the sky still held its color, soft gold fading into gray. The olive trees outside rustled like they knew what was coming. And beneath the quiet hum of conversation, something ancient stirred. The room was dim, lit by the flicker of oil lamps that painted long shadows across stone walls. Their flames danced gently, unaware they were bearing witness to the unraveling of eternity. The disciples sat close, their voices low, laughter brief. The scent of roasted lamb still lingered in the air, mixed with the earthy aroma of dust from worn sandals. It should have felt like any other evening, but inside me it did not. Inside me, a pressure had begun to build. Not fear, not dread, revelation. There was a sound in the silence, not heard with ears, but felt in the soul. Every glance, every smile, every movement carried weight. The kind of weight that speaks louder than words. This will not last. And I felt it like footsteps just beyond the door. The nearness of pain, still dressed in peace. I looked at their faces, so full of love, so unaware of the cost that love would soon demand. And even as I sat among them, my heart had already begun to walk into the garden, already tasting the silence, already hearing the words that would shatter the air and my spirit. But for now, I stayed, listening, watching, loving, because not all storms arrive with wind. Some begin with a sentence. He was there, not shouting, not standing tall, just present, leaning near me, as if silence were a language only we shared. It was John, the quiet one, the one whose love was steady but not loud. The world barely noticed him, but I did. He didn't speak the sentence that shook me, but he heard it. He felt it, not in words, but in the way my body paused, in the way my breath caught for a moment. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. His head rested on my chest, and he listened to the heartbeat of a God who was breaking slowly. And still I smiled, not because I felt no pain, but because love makes even grief bearable when someone chooses to stay close without needing to fix it. But not all were near. Some were already far in spirit, though their bodies sat inches away. And that's where the ache began, to be surrounded, yet alone, to carry what no one else could feel, to hear a sentence so full of love, so full of fire, that I knew would not survive the cold night ahead. I would never leave you. That voice echoed louder than any betrayal, because it came from a place of love, not deception. And that was the conflict within me. To hold their devotion, knowing it would dissolve. To bless their voices, knowing they would fall silent. To love them fully and still let them fail. Not out of indifference, but because real love does not try to control what it already forgives. So I sat there, listening to the ones who couldn't yet hear themselves. And I chose to carry not only their hearts, but their breaking. I stepped closer. The wind stopped, not because the air had calmed, but because time itself seemed to pause. Creation held its breath. The sky had not yet turned dark, but in my spirit, shadows were already gathering. He didn't know what his words would become. He didn't know they would follow me into the garden, echo behind the sound of lashes, cling to me heavier than the weight of the cross itself. But I knew, I will never leave you. That's what he said. And the moment I heard it, something broke open inside me. Not because the words were false, but because they were real, because they were spoken from love. And that kind of love, untested by fire, still trembles in the wind. I looked into his eyes, those same eyes that had once been filled with terror on the sea, then wonder on the mountaintop, and now certainty, a certainty that would not survive the night. I wanted to believe him. Part of me, the part still wrapped in flesh did. I wanted that to be the one sentence that made it through the darkness untouched. But love is not made of declarations. Love is revealed in the silence after failure. So I didn't correct him. I didn't say, no, you will leave me. I simply carried his words into the depth of my soul and let them rest there, knowing they would soon return in the form of a tear. Not from me, but from him. That was the pain. Not the betrayal of enemies, but the unraveling of friends. Not the lash of whips, but the sound of footsteps running away. Not the nails, but the silence that came after someone said, I would never. Because when Peter said those words, he meant them. And still they would break. And still, I loved him. That is what makes the pain of love divine. To see what is coming and choose not to shield your heart. To hear the thunder inside someone's soul and still let them speak. To be strong enough to absorb the storm and soft enough to stay open after. That night, something in me surrendered. Not my mission, that had always been clear, but something in my heart bent and did not break. I stopped asking them to understand. I stopped waiting for them to be ready. I simply chose to love them as they were. Because the sky was going to turn dark, and they were going to run, and my heart was going to break in ways no prophet ever described. But love does not quit when it gets quiet. Love stays. Love remembers the voice that once said, I will never leave you, even when that voice is lost in a courtyard of denial. That's what shook me. Not that they would fall, but that I would still want them after. And that was my first crucifixion, before the tree, before the thorns. I died to my right to be loved well, so that I could love freely. And I made that choice, not for Peter alone, but for every trembling soul who ever made a promise they couldn't keep. For every heart that said, I'll never leave you, and then did. For every voice that went silent in the hour of shadow. For you, if you've ever said something to me that you couldn't fulfill, if your love for me was real, but your fear was louder, if you carry the weight of words you once spoke in fire, now cold in your memory, I want you to know, I was listening. I still am. And I didn't walk away. Because that kind of love doesn't end in the night. It waits for the morning. It weeps, but it waits. If this page of my diary whispered something to your soul, if it reminded you of who you used to be, or who you still long to become, subscribe. Not to a video, to a voice. A voice that never stopped calling your name. A voice that still believes in your return. Because when the sky turns dark, grace still speaks. And on this day, I learned something not written in the scrolls. I learned that love doesn't always need to be strong. It only needs to be honest. Peter's words didn't hurt me because they were false. They hurt me because they were true in the moment and still would not survive the night. And that taught me something sacred, that even sincere love can break. And yet, I still received it. Because the measure of love is not in how long it lasts, but in how deeply it dares to speak, even when it doesn't yet understand its limits. I looked at Peter and saw not his failure, but his desire. Not his fall, but his fire. And I realized I wasn't here to be surrounded by strength. I was here to carry the ones who would fall and still long to rise again. This is mercy. Mercy is not given to the flawless. It is born in the silence after someone says, I'm sorry. It lives in the moment after the denial, in the return, in the eyes that look for me even after they've looked away. And that day, I didn't just learn about them. I remembered something about myself, that my Father did not send me to collect the perfect. He sent me to meet the trembling. Those who mean well break anyway and still come home. That is the gospel. That is the grace I carry. And that is the grace still being written in my diary. Today, I was not crowned. I was not betrayed. I was not abandoned. Not yet. But I was shaken by a voice that loved me, by a heart that tried to reach beyond its own breaking point, by a promise made in fire, soon to be scattered in ashes. And yet, I did not turn away. I held this sentence like a treasure, even knowing it would fall apart in the night. Because love does not measure itself by what it avoids, but by what it's willing to carry. And that's what I carry today. A sentence, a soul, a sorrow not yet spoken. And in that moment, I remembered why I came. Not for certainty, but for closeness. Not for those who never fall, but for those who fall and still whisper, I miss you. So I leave this page with a question. Not for Peter, for you. What have you said to me in the silence of your soul that you think I've forgotten? Because I haven't. I remember every word, even the ones you stopped saying, and I am still listening. Neo dis nada. Apenas dixi que aquel momento verás palavra, no meu Jesus diary. If this page of my diary found your heart, don't let it stay hidden. Someone near you may be carrying a promise they couldn't keep, or silence they don't know how to speak. Share this, not for numbers, but so that one more soul can remember. Even broken words are still heard in heaven. And if your spirit is still listening, another page is waiting. It's appearing on your screen now. Watch it. Let it whisper what you've been afraid to ask. Let it remind you, I never stopped listening, and I never stopped loving you.